say, here's Dave. Since you've already heard it once, here's Dave.
And because it's always, what have you done for me lately? Okay, so it doesn't matter what I've done before, it doesn't matter what my accolades or whatever, though they are small, it doesn't matter. It's what happens right now that matters. It's what you think. And I'm hoping that y'all will enjoy this talk. I got interested in this several years ago, the topic of the power of plants. And I'm not talking about like turgor pressure, you know, the physical power of plants. I'm talking about the power that plants have with people. It's the people-plant relationships. There is something there. There's got to be something there. There's, you know, there's just something we know as gardeners that's going on. That serenity base right there. We're talking about being in the garden, and it's a place of serenity. It's a place to escape, and when we're working, even pulling weeds. For the first 2 hours, it's great. Then it's no fun anymore. But there is something about being in the garden and being in nature that really affects us fundamentally at the core as human beings. I say it goes back to the original place of mankind in a garden. Okay, that's where I kind of think we were wired to be. Of course, we blew that. But so we go back to the garden and we try to enjoy it. There's something there. And I started looking into this and looking at it. There's actually research that is documented, scientific research, which truly does support some of those things that we've kind of known intuitively. And that's what I want to share with you, is a little bit about some of that research and some of the emerging things we see that result from that. If you get sleepy when you have lunch, that's okay. Just don't snore. You drool a whole bit. But and I was wondering about the light. Do you think would we really go to sleep?
I mean, I think that's a dimming thing there.
If there's a dimmer, that'd be awesome because then we don't need to sleep. Okay, I've only got 3 hours with y'all. So, all right. So, and I do want to.
That's not it. Don't turn off.
Plug for the book that Sandra mentioned. That is really well done. So I encourage you that. We really are trying to recruit, get kids interested in being in the garden. And so maybe we'll learn something more about that. How's that, guys? That really is perfect. Thank you. Okay. Well, that's for one of my garden trips with Tom, and there's Matt off in the distance. There's one of the gardens in England we went to. But you know, Matt's looking at that. Tom's looking at the flowers, and he's going, "That is so pretty." Why is he attracted to that? Why does it appeal to him? Why did it draw him over there? I think it's because plants appeal to us. Plants do have tremendous impact on us as human beings, and for different reasons. For wealth and healthy, health. That had to have been a Freudian slip. Wealth and well-being. I don't know. Health and well-being. There's something. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as a topic. The perception of our living environment. In landscape design, this is a huge thing, and I teach a landscape design class, or I used to. And I don't do anything now. I'm an administrator, so I'm just. But teaching landscape design, a big thing is perception of the environment, how we influence the way people perceive where we live, and plants are an important part of that. And then financial priorities, let's face it, you know? I mean, if we're going to invest in stuff, we want it to be something that's worthwhile, and plants can influence how we spend our money, okay? And where we put that money. Not just a garden center. I'm talking about how we place those plants can influence people, all right? So sometimes it's unexpected, but it can be documented. So isn't that a pretty little scene there? That's just, you know, I don't know, that's just kind of a place I want to go. I don't know about you. I want somebody would say, some of my students say, oh, there's probably snakes in there. Just man up. Okay. I want to go back to, and I kind of want to do, this is what we call, with our graduate students, would do a literature review. Okay, their first seminar, they have to do a literature review, which kind of, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a seminar here for just a second. Talk about a few real important studies that were done having to do with plants and human well-being. The big one, the one that kind of launched it all, was by Roger Ulrich. He's a psychologist, still involved in research today. in the medical profession, still does some work with the impact of plants and nature on us. He did a study showing that, well, what it was is a hospital, and they took some patients, they kept up with, they interviewed nurses. You'd appreciate that. They'd interview nurses and ask them about the condition of the patients. They would keep up with their all their medical records, the doses of the medicine and that sort of thing. The difference was gallbladder surgery patients that had a view of nature out of their window versus gallbladder surgery patients who looked out another window that was just part of the building. It was just a wall and the top of the hospital and all that stuff. So this is amazing because he was the first one to document that the ones having a view of nature, statistical differences, okay, this is scientifically shown, that the ones who had the view of nature had a shorter stay in the hospital by 1 full day, okay, reduced strong medicine doses. Their mind was taken off of the pain, I guess, and then they had reduced negative comments. The nurses, anecdotally, they demonstrated that these patients weren't as cranky as the ones on the other side. So, you know who this got really interested in this? Who do you think really thought this was a cool study?
The government.
Huh?
The government.
Insurance companies.
What?
Yes,
insurance companies saw this one. Cha-ching, this is good. All right, because we can, this is reducing what we're having to put into this thing. So all of a sudden it gained a lot of traction. People became interested in doing research on this. With Alzheimer's patients, this was a study, it's way back in '92, where in a hospital, well, several facilities that had Alzheimer's patients, what they found was in a facility that had gardens and plant materials compared to a facility that didn't, they had a 19% decreased demonstration of violence. Okay, now, one of the things about, my uncle had Alzheimer's, and he was, until he had Alzheimer's, he was one of the sweetest men you'd ever meet. But when he became sick, he got meaner and meaner and meaner. And I think it was just frustrating. I just think but what they found was with the plants, that tendency to be frustrated and angry was reduced because of the presence of plants. Now, they don't know why. They think that maybe it could be because the patients were able to kind of relate to the plants, find their bearings. For whatever reason, they could latch on to that as being something tangible and go, yeah, this is good. So that was an important study with showing the impact of plants in that facility. Unruh, in 2004, did a study involving cancer patients, and he would have cancer patients that would garden and some that would not. And what they found was that with the patients that garden, they seem to have what they categorized as better coping skills. They seem to have better attitudes, have a more positive outlook because of their working in the garden. Hospitals and healthcare facilities really began to move, in large part because of Ulrich and his original study, toward developing gardens and at least making it possible to have more connection with nature. So that was a trend which began, and I experienced this really with my first real experience of this in an institutional sense was with John Amos Cancer Center in Columbus, Georgia. They asked me to come talk about this at the opening of the Cancer Center. I thought, well, why would they want me to talk about this? At the Cancer Center, there's a lot more important things than plants. And I had been studying this stuff. Well, you know why? Because this was the backup. And what they said was, we believe that this will have a profound impact on our patients, but not only our patients, okay? Because there's families that come to have to deal with very stressful, emotional situations. And if we can put them in a garden that can calm them and give them a sense of peace in a crisis time in their life, not only them though, think of who else is involved in this deal? The caregivers, the nurses, the doctors, the other folks, they had a place to go to have lunch, to get away. You know, if you're operating this machinery, you got people that are in there and they're hurting and it's traumatic, and you got to get away from that. And so they realized, we believe that this, based on the data that's out there, that this would be something that's important. So they invested a lot of money in developing gardens at the Cancer Center. And you know, there are other places too. That's the Cancer Center. That's Amos Cancer Center. Look at that. I mean, you just kind of want to go there. Right? It's just really nice. Women's and Children's Hospital in Birmingham. That's on the roof. Okay? More hospitals going to rooftop gardens. Same story. An escape, a place to go. And I'm so sorry if I'm fouling you. Okay? It's a place to escape. I'm very proud of this one in particular, though, because the company my daughter used to work with actually installed that. So she's part of it. Here you got, this is North Georgia Hospital in Gainesville, Georgia. And they just did a tremendous, they reproduced some of the landscape around there in the mountains and hills in the area. And then they just created this really nice little wandering landscape just to get away. My brother-in-law is a chaplain at that hospital, and he says it's just transformative what they've done. Just be able to walk around the hospital and not feel like you're at a hospital. 80%, well 82% of residential care facilities list outdoor space as extremely important, okay, in the recovery process. In the overall design of this facility, but in the recovery process. We think about all these wonderful strides that we've made in medicine, and they're so important, they're so critical. Thank you that we have doctors and nurses. Thank you that we have researchers that are doing that work. But sometimes we as gardeners, we don't take the credit, I think, for some pretty amazing things that are wired into us and take advantage of. And I see that happening more in these facilities now than ever before. You may have heard of them called healing gardens. And there is a definition. Diane Ralph, who's done a lot of work in this area, she's at Virginia Tech. She says, you know, a healing garden is a garden attached to a hospital or medical facility intended to be used by patients, visitors, and facility staff as they so choose. That's what we've been talking about. That's the whole purpose of it. And this healing that goes on many levels, emotional, psychological, even physical. It can be a benefit to just everybody that comes out there. Here's some examples of some of those documented benefits in the research that we promote exercise when you have these gardens. This garden right here, this is Women's and Children's Hospital in Mobile. How many of you have been there? Anybody ever been there? It's cool, isn't it? But yeah, you've got these, you see that child, she was there and then she just turned to stone. Well, I was just thinking, you know, that's kind of like in Colorado, they make those brownies with the, you know, stuff. People get stoned and eat brownies. Anyway, we can strike that from the record. Anyway, but that's a really, you see what happens is in that garden, really it's a park. And the kids, you can stroll through there, whether it's in a wheelchair or whether they're ambulatory or whether it's the family, and they can wander through and look at the statues, which are terrific. They show children playing, children with parents. It's just, and even some animals and things that they can see that they can, it's just an adventure for the kids to go and be able to see those things. It gets them out of the world they're in the hospital into a world of that they can enjoy. Amos Cancer Center again. And then Celebration Health, that's at Celebration Disney World in Lake Buena Vista, near Disney World. So very nice escape to healing gardens, place of social interaction, place to enhance a sense of self-control, because if your body's falling apart, it sure is nice to feel like you're in control of something and to be able to go outside and see things like that. So all of that, the garden has benefits. Some important elements. That's a giraffe. I don't know what. Some important elements. If you're going to do a healing garden, and maybe, you know, I don't know, maybe you'd be inspired to go to Monroeville and the hospital says, we need a healing garden. And KT's going to go, I can do that. I got it. All right. Well, this is what you're going to want nature. You're going to have vegetation. It needs to be calm. Lots of color. but not necessarily a lot of maintenance and not necessarily a lot of insects. Okay? It needs to be a calm place. Water is always a winner. You always want, if you can get water in there, that's great. If you can get water in there that children can put their hands in, okay, and interact with, that's huge. If you can put water that nurses can sit down and run their hands through it, that's healing. Okay, so that's a neat thing about it. You want to avoid abstract art. Salvador Dali has no place in a healing garden. I'm sorry. You may be a Salvador Dali fan, but that just freaks people out in a healing garden. What you want is tangible things. This giraffe, the children's statuary, you know, those things right there are concrete, literally. But they're tangible. They're things that they can grasp and interact and relate to. And that's far more important than a drooping clock. Then healing gardens can also be situated, you know, where you have the sounds of the city, but you want to muffle those, you want to mute those. So that's where, again, where the water helps, where sound chimes, wind chimes, things that become auditory focal points. So it takes their mind off of traffic and busy things going around and that. So yeah, that's what you, that's the kind of things you want to look for in a healing garden. Whimsical things, I forgot to mention that. If you do have some whimsical things. Not necessarily wind chimes, but chimes they can go and play. Like you see in a children's garden at some botanical gardens. You know, you can, I think Huntsville Botanic Garden has some,
Yes, we do.
some and that's fun. You know, I'm out there playing all kinds of stuff. Or eagle fly on the field. I don't ever play da 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 da. That's a lot harder to play. All right. All right. So, beyond the hospital, okay, I made a big deal about the hospital, but wait, there's more. I think Nell mentioned I spent a little time in Russia. I was sure glad to get out. That's Moscow, but look at that big city. I mean, I was freaked out by the language and the culture, but also the traffic and the you can't tell there. It was pretty polluted, it's pretty nasty. But then over here, that river right there is the Thames River, and you know, and that's actually, you know, a common area near on the side of London. And it was just, look at that, man, that was just, I could have sat there for hours just looking out over that scene. This scene, I said, get me to the airport. I got to get out of here, you know. But Ulrich found in a study where he had people wired, you know, to test their stress levels. He had the EKG, you know, so check the heart rate and all that kind of stuff, and he would show scenes of driving through cities, and then he'd show scenes of driving through nature, and he documented clear physiological differences. Now, that seems like a no-brainer to us, but it's one thing to think, oh, that's kind of how I feel. It's another thing when you actually demonstrate scientifically that these are real phenomena, that this is really happening. There is a relaxation that's going on, whether we think about it or not. That's why we like to drive through the country, except for all the deer running out of the woods, rather than driving through the city. I mean, it's just stressful. And so that was an important study. Again, it's one of those that had to do with highway departments. Highway departments began to look at how we do medians, how we do right away, and that sort of thing, to make it a more pleasant experience rather than just, you know, putting stuff right up to the road. Now, all right, so this was an interesting stuff. Virginia Lohr et al., that means that she had some pie and et al. No, well, that's a fancy term for saying, uh-oh. I wonder what that means.
Well, I don't know, it's a flashing fire thing, isn't it?
I would think it'd be going off if there was really a problem.
I think
We will
so.
go check it out. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe so. Well, if that won't drive you nuts, oh, now, what am I doing?
Stressful.
Your stress level just went up. Let's go look at plants. What do you say? All right, so, but Virginia, this means and others. So she was part of a research team in 1996 that looked at performance of students doing a task in a lab. and it was a computer lab. They had a certain task that they had to do. This is not the actual one, but it's about the right time of when that was done. But what they were looking at is they had a project to do. In the room where they had more plants, they recorded a 12% faster reaction time in that task on the computer, and they recorded, again, less stress levels than the same task performed in a room without plants. The difference was the plants. How could that be? You know, how? I don't know, but the plants made a difference. I like this one. Virginia went on and did another one. This is probably the weakest study of all of them that I'll share today, but I like it anyway because I thought it was so funny. What she did is she had people put their hands in ice water and see how long they could hold their arms in ice water when there are plants around them or when there are not plants around them. The ones that had plants around them could tolerate the ice water longer than the ones who didn't have plants. That's pretty weak. But she actually got statistical. There was a difference. There was something going on there. Now, the question is, would it matter if it was plants or if it was artwork or if it was a dog or, you know, if it was just something to take your mind off of it, right? So we don't know that for sure. But I just thought it was kind of neat that we could endure pain more. Earlier on, we got some of the early work about worker efficiency was actually in a factory with Marchand, found that worker efficiency increased by 10 to 15% if they had areas to go, to get away, to have little garden-like areas. That's actually in a mall. I just put it in there because it kind of captured the idea. Their perception of their work environment was better with plants than without. Dravine, this was the most recent of these studies, but I'm going to read it. You can read it, but I'm going to read it because I just want to. Findings indicated that individuals worked in offices with plants and windows reported they felt better about the job and the work they performed. So looking at that, I'd feel better if I saw that looking at my, that's pretty nice. That's a resort, but you know, you get the idea. This study also provided evidence that those employees who worked in offices that had plants or windows reported higher overall quality of life scores. Just like a hospital. You just feel better if you got a view of nature. Isn't that amazing? All right. Now, let's go to infinity and beyond. Wolverton, this guy was with NASA for many years. He worked on a project a long time ago, 89, but this work continued for a while in a project called CELS, Containing Environment Life Support System. The idea was to prepare a mission to deep space. We can't, as humans, carry everything we need to survive. We can't carry enough oxygen and food and water, but if we can carry an ecosystem which is completely self-contained, maybe we can go to Saturn. Who knows? Did y'all see the movie The Martian?
No.
One. You saw it. Okay. Okay. Well, okay. Good. Well, if you hadn't seen The Martian, it's not my favorite Martian. Remember that? That was good. But it's really interesting because in order to survive, he gets stranded on Mars, okay? In order to survive, he has to be a gardener. He says he's the best botanist on Mars. Well, he's not a botanist, he's a horticulturist. All right? Forget it. Forget that botany thing. I'm studying leaves, man. He's growing stuff to eat. Fascinating movie. But the idea was to create an ecosystem that would allow you to survive and just do what Earth does, okay? Is provide energy to survive and a place, something to do with waste, and then recycle it to something we can use, okay? That's what Earth does. So we're going to do that in space. So Wolverton was the pioneer on this, and one of his first studies showed that certain plants could actually reduce levels of pollutants. Okay, so Dracaena, peace lily, spider plant, snake plant, you wouldn't eat those. You know, you'd want to use plants you could eat, but he did show that there was that, like Van Helmont's experiment that discovered, you know, that plants release oxygen and take in carbon dioxide, right? Well, he kind of showed that, well, you know, we can adjust the interior environment if we use the right plants in the right way. So that was early experiments, further work in other areas. looked at how do you improve indoor living environments in buildings, in constructed facilities. 30% of new or remodeled buildings have some detectable level of these pollutants: trichloroethylene, benzene, formaldehyde. And one reason is because we make tight buildings. Okay? I mean, that's a good thing, right? It's not like my house, which has, there's so many cracks and holes, and you know, it's an old house, 1929. You can imagine, it is not a tight building. We don't have pollutants, well, mold, but we don't have any. But, you know, that's an amazing thing. What they found, well, Laura, remember Virginia? Well, she also found that plants are pretty efficient at trapping dust. That makes sense. You know, they're transpiring, you know, and so that moisture coming out of the leaves is going to trap dust, it's going to catch dust. So, in Europe, a few years back, I guess probably about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a promotional campaign to try to encourage use of plants in a work environment. So they were buying into this thing. Plants, I forgot to mention this in the hospital part, but every hospital facility since 2000, I think 2000, maybe late 90s, that's been constructed, one of the requirements in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway is that every room has to have a view of nature. Okay? So they're really all into this. Isn't that great? Here, the effort in Europe was to try to promote every office having plants. Now, it looks a little contrived right here, but hey, you know, it's better than nothing, right? This is pretty weak, but it's better than nothing, you know?
Wow.
All right, now, so that's the health and well-being. Those are some of the aspects of it. KT wanted me to talk more about what we eat.
Yeah, so I could live longer.
Okay.
Healthy.
I'm not going to talk about that. We're just talking about the psychological and social benefits. We'll talk about the food some other, or that'll be extra.
We could do that as a special topic
Yeah,
at class.
that's a good idea.
Yeah.
But now, how many of you recognize this place? You know where that is? No, that's a great guess. That is a great guess. That's not it.
Nashville.
Huh?
Opryland Hotel?
Yes.
Yes.
Gaylord Opryland.
Nashville.
Yeah, that's it. Now remember, it flooded. It flooded. It was bad. This was pre-flood. It's like, and then Noah came along, and then this is post-flood. So they came back in there. But it's if you have not been to Opryland Hotel in Nashville, it's really worth going just to see the hotel. It's massive.
And the dancing fountains.
Yeah. Oh man, they got fountains. I used to have the guy to play the piano. Anyway, but it's just a beautiful place to visit. You want to go in there, and that whole living environment right there is profoundly impacted by the plants. They help to direct traffic flow. They provide visual screens. People can meet in little secluded areas, but this is all in the hotel, so it feels like a safe environment. Softens the landscape, brings this massive structure down to human scale, so we're not overwhelmed by it. Does a lot of good things. But this is the thing that is the money part, right? The financial priorities. In a study by Evans and Malone, when they first opened the Opryland Hotel atrium, this was the old part. This is the part that was the original part. See these rooms right here? See there's a lot of rooms here? I've stayed in those rooms one time. I've been to Opryland Hotel twice. Once I stayed in interior, once I stayed exterior. The reason I stayed exterior is because the rooms were a whole lot cheaper. Okay, and that's when I went and was paying for it. When I went for a meeting and y'all were paying for it, I stayed in the interior rooms. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. But the thing is, this is what they found. Evans and Malone, they found that rooms overlooking the atrium cost more, but had a much higher occupancy rate. And the original installation, which is not a lot for that facility, but it was $2.2 million, within just a couple of years, within 4 or 5 years, they had a $7 million increase in income due to higher occupancy rate. In other words, that was the difference in occupancy rate between the exterior viewing rooms and the interior facing rooms. People want to stay in those, and they're willing to pay more to stay in those interior rooms so they can feel like that's part of their living environment. People, when you walk through there, people are out on their balconies, and in the morning it's glorious. You sit on your balcony, get some coffee, get some Danish, and you're sitting out there reading a paper, and you know people are walking around. There's some birds in there. It's just And it's climate controlled. It's just, it feels good. It's just awesome. What a nice place to be. People will pay more for that. Why do people come to places like Epcot, Biltmore Estate? This is Disney. And what's going on with this guy? He's proposing to her. Why do they go